There are moments in history when the world shifts on its axis, when old certainties crumble and new realities crash into existence. The story of Crazy Horse is one of those moments. It's a story of vision and violence, of sacred land and broken promises, of a warrior who was never defeated in battle but could not stop the tide of history itself. This is not a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's something more complicated, more human, more tragic. It's about what happens when two expanding powers collide over the same ground, when cultures that see the world in fundamentally different ways are forced into conflict, neither truly wanted, but both seemed unable to avoid. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To understand Crazy Horse, you have to understand the world he was born into. Picture the Great Plains in the 1840s. This is a landscape of almost overwhelming scale, an ocean of grass rolling endlessly beneath an immense sky. The Oglala Lakota had built their entire civilization around one magnificent animal, the buffalo. These weren't just a food source. The buffalo provided everything: meat for eating, hides for lodges and clothing, bones for tools, sinew for bowstrings. When a buffalo hunt succeeded, the whole camp exploded in celebration and shared work. Everyone with their role, nothing wasted. The rhythm of life followed the seasons and the herds. Winters were spent in sheltered valleys. Springs brought renewal and ceremonies. Summers meant following the buffalo and gathering in great encampments where different bands would meet, where young people would court, where the old men would tell stories, where the entire nation would come together. This was a sophisticated culture with its own complex social structures, its own forms of governance, its own deep spiritual beliefs. They didn't see themselves as wandering nomads. They were a nation with territory, with laws, with purpose. Into this world, around 1840, a boy was born. His name was Tashunka Witko, which would later be translated as Crazy Horse, though the true meaning is closer to his horse is spirited, or his horse is wild. From the beginning, he was different. His skin was lighter than most. His hair had a brownish tint. Some boys grow up loud, always at the center of attention. This boy was quiet, thoughtful, often alone. He wasn't withdrawn exactly, just observant, watching, thinking. When he reached his early teens, the time came for his vision quest. This wasn't optional. This was how a young person discovered who they were meant to be, how they fit into the larger pattern of existence. The boy went out alone to a remote hilltop. No food, no water. Just exposure to the elements and whatever the spirits might reveal. He stayed there for days, pushing his body past exhaustion, past thirst, into that liminal space where the physical world and the spirit world touch. And then he saw it. A warrior on horseback riding through a storm. Lightning flashed around him. Arrows flew toward him. Bullets streaked through the air. Nothing touched him. The rider moved through the chaos, untouched, unafraid, as if he existed in a different reality than the violence surrounding him. The horse seemed to float rather than run. The warrior wore simple clothes, just a single hawk feather in his hair, a small stone behind his ear. No war paint, no elaborate decoration. Behind him, his own people tried to hold him back, grabbing at him, but he rode on. When the young man returned to camp and told his father about the vision, the older man understood immediately. "You have seen yourself," he told his son. "You have seen who you are meant to become." The vision carried instructions. Dress simply. Never take anything for yourself. Before battle, throw dust over your horse and yourself. Let nothing hold you back, not even your own people. If you do these things, you will be protected as the warrior in the vision was protected. This wasn't arrogance or mysticism in the way we might think of it today. This was the psychological armor that would allow a young man to ride directly into the most terrifying situations imaginable, to lead from the front when every instinct screamed to hang back. The vision became his truth, and that truth made him dangerous in ways the United States Army would soon discover. But before that, before the great battles and the impossible victories, there was blood. In August 1854, when the boy who would become Crazy Horse was perhaps 13 or 14 years old, he witnessed something that would poison the possibility of peace for decades to come. It's remembered as the Grattan Massacre, though that name tells you who named it. Here's what happened. A cow belonging to a Mormon emigrant train wandered off and was killed by a Lakota man visiting from another band. Not a big deal by Lakota standards. Pay the owner, move on. But Lieutenant John Grattan, fresh from West Point and eager to make his mark, decided this required a military response. He took 29 soldiers, an interpreter who was drunk, and 2 howitzer cannons to the Lakota camp to arrest the man who killed the cow. The Lakota chief Conquering Bear tried to negotiate, tried to offer compensation, tried everything to defuse the situation. Grattan refused. The tension built. Someone fired a shot. Within minutes, all 30 soldiers, including Grattan, were dead, cut down in a brief, furious fight. The young man who would become Crazy Horse watched this happen, watched how quickly talking became killing, watched how the soldiers came into the camp with cannons to arrest one man over one cow. Watched the consequences ripple outward. The U.S. Army responded with a punitive expedition. Lakota responded to that. Each action justified the next reaction. The cycle of violence had begun, but this wasn't random. This wasn't just cultural misunderstanding. 2 powers were expanding into the same territory, and both believed they had every right to be there. The United States had just acquired vast new territories from Mexico and was pushing wagon trains west along the Oregon Trail, which cut right through Lakota hunting grounds. The first Fort Laramie Treaty in 1851 tried to solve this by drawing boundaries, defining territories for different tribes, promising payments in exchange for safe passage. To the U.S. government, this was sensible policy, a way to manage the frontier. To the Lakota, it was nonsense. You don't own land like you own a horse. You don't draw lines on paper and expect the buffalo to respect them. The treaty meant nothing because the 2 sides lived in entirely different realities about what land was and what claims to it even meant. And the railroad was coming. Everyone knew it. Iron rails that would carry thousands of settlers, that would require military protection, that would transform the entire geography of power on the plains. The question wasn't whether there would be war. The question was when it would start and how long it would last. The war came because of gold. It always seems to come down to gold. In 1862, prospectors found it in Montana Territory. Not just traces, but significant deposits that promised real wealth. The problem was geography. The safest, shortest route from the eastern settlements to the Montana goldfields ran straight through the heart of Lakota Territory. The U.S. Army decided to build a series of forts along what became known as the Bozeman Trail, protecting travelers and miners as they passed through. Think about what this meant. Imagine someone deciding to build a highway through your home, not around it, through it, and then posting armed guards to make sure they could do it. The Bozeman Trail cut directly through the Powder River country, some of the best hunting grounds the Lakota had. Every wagon train, every group of miners, every military supply column scared off game and pushed the buffalo herds away. This wasn't theoretical. This was an existential threat to the Lakota way of life. A chief named Red Cloud understood this immediately. He was older than Crazy Horse, a proven warrior and political leader, and he made a decision that would reshape the entire conflict. He would unite the Lakota bands, bring in Cheyenne and Arapaho allies, and fight a war to close the Bozeman Trail. Not raids, not scattered attacks, an organized military campaign against the United States Army. This is where Crazy Horse emerged from the shadows. He was in his mid-20s now, and his reputation was growing. Warriors followed him, not because he was loud or boastful, but because when he led, people came home alive. He fought like the warrior in his vision, riding into impossible situations and emerging untouched. But more than that, he thought about warfare in ways that gave the Lakota enormous advantages. The U.S. Army in the 1860s fought in a very specific way. Formations, discipline, concentrated firepower. Stand in lines, fire in volleys, advance in formation. This worked brilliantly in the civil war that had just ended. But on the Great Plains, against mounted warriors who refused to stand still and be shot at, these tactics were worse than useless. They were predictable. And Crazy Horse was about to demonstrate just how predictable. December 21st, 1866. Fort Phil Kearny in Wyoming Territory. The fort had been under constant harassment since it was built. Woodcutting parties attacked. Supply wagons ambushed. Sentries shot. The garrison was on edge, frustrated, eager to hit back hard. Captain William Fetterman had just arrived, a Civil War veteran with combat experience and absolute confidence in American military superiority. He reportedly said he could ride through the entire Sioux Nation with 80 men. Crazy Horse was about to give him the chance to try. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. A small group of warriors would attack the wood train near the fort. When soldiers came out to defend it, a few warriors on horseback would appear on a nearby ridge, taunting them, daring them to chase. The moment the soldiers committed to pursuit, hundreds of warriors, hidden in the ravines and behind the ridges, would spring the trap. It required perfect timing. It required discipline from warriors who valued individual glory and often fought as individuals rather than as a coordinated unit. It required someone willing to be the bait, to ride slowly enough that the soldiers would think they could catch him, but fast enough to stay just out of rifle range, to lead armed men who wanted to kill him across several miles of broken terrain into an ambush. Crazy Horse volunteered for that role. When the attack on the wood train came, Fetterman led 80 men out of the fort. His orders from the fort commander were explicit. Do not cross Lodge Trail Ridge. Do not go beyond sight of the fort. Relieve the wood train and return. But when Fetterman saw warriors on horseback on the ridge, taunting him, riding back and forth, he made a decision that would cost him everything. Crazy Horse and about 10 other warriors rode along the ridge, staying just far enough ahead. When the soldiers got close, the warriors would ride away. When the soldiers slowed down, the warriors would stop and wait. It must have been infuriating. These warriors weren't fighting. They were playing. They were inviting the soldiers to come teach them a lesson. And Fetterman took the invitation over Lodge Trail Ridge, beyond sight of the fort, into a valley between ridges. The warriors ahead suddenly seemed to panic, their horses stumbling, the riders looking vulnerable. The soldiers advanced faster. And then the world exploded. Hundreds of warriors rose from hiding, some on horseback, some on foot. They came from the sides, from behind, cutting off any retreat. The soldiers tried to form a defensive position on a small ridge. They fought hard. They were veterans, well-armed, desperate. It didn't matter. The Lakota and Cheyenne warriors overwhelmed them in less than 40 minutes. All 80 soldiers died. Some accounts say they killed Fetterman's dog too, because it kept trying to defend the bodies. When relief forces from the fort finally arrived, they found a scene of total annihilation. This wasn't a battle. This was a massacre, a complete tactical victory that announced to the United States that this war would not be easy, that the Lakota had leaders who could outthink American officers, that the forts on the Bozeman Trail were not symbols of control, but isolated targets. Why did they fight so hard? Why risk everything for this particular ground? To understand that, you have to understand Pahasapa, the Black Hills. To the Lakota, these mountains weren't just valuable territory. They were the center of everything. Creation stories placed the Lakota people emerging from caves in the Black Hills. Sacred ceremonies required plants and materials found only there. Vision quests were conducted in those hills. When Lakota people died, their spirits returned there. This was the heart of the world, the place where the physical and spiritual realms touched. The U.S. government had guaranteed the Black Hills to the Lakota in various treaties, but those guarantees meant nothing if the surrounding territory was overrun with miners and settlers and soldiers. The Bozeman Trail was the first step toward losing everything. Red Cloud and Crazy Horse and thousands of other warriors understood this. They weren't fighting for pride or glory. They were fighting for survival as a people, The Fetterman fight was followed by 2 more years of relentless pressure. The forts couldn't be supplied safely. Garrison life became a nightmare of constant vigilance and occasional terror. In Washington, politicians and generals looked at the costs and benefits and made a calculation. Was this piece of ground worth an extended military campaign? In 1868, they decided it wasn't. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 is one of the most important and most betrayed documents in American history. The United States agreed to abandon the forts on the Bozeman Trail. They agreed that the Black Hills and the surrounding territory would be the Great Sioux Reservation, closed to white settlement forever. The Lakota could hunt in the Powder River country. No whites allowed without permission. This was everything Red Cloud and his allies had fought for. The Lakota warriors watched as the soldiers abandoned the forts. Then they burned them to the ground. It was a moment of complete triumph, proof that resistance could work, that the United States could be forced to back down. Red Cloud believed the treaty would hold. He moved onto the reservation, became a negotiator, tried to work within the new system. Crazy Horse never trusted it. He stayed away from the agencies, stayed out on the plains, kept living the old way. His instinct would prove correct, because in the Black Hills there was gold, lots of it. And 8 years after the treaty was signed, that gold would bring everything crashing down. In the summer of 1874, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills. Officially, this was a reconnaissance mission to locate a site for a new fort. Everyone knew what they were really looking for. The expedition included geologists, miners, newspaper reporters. When they found gold, Custer made sure the whole nation heard about it. His dispatches described gold in the roots of the grass, nuggets lying on the ground, waiting to be picked up. Most of it was exaggeration, but enough was true. The timing couldn't have been worse for keeping the peace. The United States was still reeling from the panic of 1873, a financial crisis that had devastated the economy. Banks failed. Railroads went bankrupt. Unemployment soared, and now here was news of gold, lots of it, sitting in territory that was legally off-limits but practically undefended. The government made a half-hearted effort to keep miners out. It failed. By 1875, thousands of prospectors were flooding into the Black Hills, treaty or no treaty. The U.S. government tried to buy the Black Hills. They offered $6 million. The Lakota refused. The Black Hills weren't for sale at any price. You can't sell the heart of the world. The government tried to negotiate a lease agreement, offering $400,000 per year to mine the hills. Again, refusal. The impasse was complete. The government had a treaty it no longer wanted to honor. The Lakota had a sacred territory they would not surrender. Something had to break. In December 1875, the U.S. government issued an ultimatum. All Lakota bands must report to the designated agencies by January 31st, 1876, or be declared hostile. Think about what this meant. It was winter on the Great Plains. Deep snow, freezing temperatures. Moving entire camps with children and elders in those conditions could be fatal. The deadline was impossibly short, even if the bands had wanted to comply. Many of them never even received the message. It didn't matter. This ultimatum wasn't really about compliance. It was about creating legal justification for military action when the deadline passed. The U.S. Army launched the Great Sioux War. The plan was to converge on the non-treaty bands from 3 directions with overwhelming force. General George Crook from the south, Colonel John Gibbon from the west, General Alfred Terry with Custer and the 7th Cavalry from the east. Catch the Lakota between these columns and force surrender. The Lakota and their allies had a different idea. Instead of scattering, they gathered. Thousands of people from different bands came together along the valley of the Little Bighorn River in Montana Territory. Uglalai hunk papa, minikonju, sansark brule chien arapaho. This wasn't just a war party. This was an entire mobile city, maybe 10,000 people, with between 1,500 and 2,000 warriors. It was the largest gathering of Plains Indians in living memory. At the center of this gathering was a spiritual leader named Sitting Bull. He was Hunkpapa Lakota, a generation older than Crazy Horse, a man whose visions carried enormous weight. In early June, Sitting Bull performed the Sun Dance, one of the most sacred and physically demanding ceremonies in Lakota culture. He danced for hours. He made 50 cuts on each arm, offering his flesh and blood to the Creator. And in the midst of his suffering and sacrifice, he had a vision. He saw soldiers falling into the camp like grasshoppers falling from the sky. He saw them upside down, their hats falling off. He heard a voice saying, "I give you these because they have no ears. They cannot listen." A great victory was coming. The spirits had promised it. The warriors believed him. How could they not? The greatest spiritual leader of their generation had seen it in a vision during the Sun Dance. The confidence this created was enormous. They would not scatter. They would not run. They would fight, and they would win. On June 17, 1876, General Crook's column was moving north through Montana Territory. About 1,300 soldiers, accompanied by Crow and Shoshone scouts who were traditional enemies of the Lakota. Crook made camp along Rosebud Creek. He didn't know that Crazy Horse and hundreds of warriors were nearby, and they weren't planning to wait for the soldiers to attack. They were going to strike first. The Battle of the Rosebud doesn't get the attention that the Little Bighorn does, but it was crucial. Crazy Horse led a massive charge directly into Crook's force. Not a raid, not hit-and-run tactics, a direct assault. The fighting lasted for hours. Warriors and soldiers spread across miles of broken terrain. Crook's men fought hard. His Crow and Shoshone scouts fought even harder, knowing what defeat would mean for them. But at the end of the day, Crook withdrew. He retreated south, took his entire column out of the campaign, and spent weeks waiting for reinforcements that never came. Think about what this meant. One of the 3 converging columns was gone, stopped cold. The plan for overwhelming force was already falling apart. And the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors rode back to their camp on the Little Bighorn, victorious, confident, exactly as Sitting Bull's vision had promised. 8 days later, on June 25th, Custer found them. Custer had been ordered to wait for Terry and Gibbon, to coordinate the attack with the other columns. He ignored those orders. His scouts told him the village was huge, warned him not to attack. He ignored them too. Custer divided his regiment into 3 battalions. He took 5 companies, about 210 men, and rode toward what he thought was the far end of the village, planning to hit them from an unexpected direction while the other battalions attacked from different angles. The village wasn't where he thought it was. It was much larger than his scouts had been able to see. When Custer's battalion rode down toward the river, they suddenly saw not a fleeing village, but thousands of warriors mounting up and riding toward them. Custer's decision changed from attack to survival in seconds. He pulled his men to high ground, a ridge overlooking the river. The warriors swarmed up from every direction. Crazy Horse led charges from the north. Gall, another war leader, attacked from the south. Warriors on foot moved through the ravines, getting closer, making every shot count. The soldiers tried to form defensive positions. Their horses panicked and broke loose, leaving men on foot with limited ammunition against overwhelming numbers. The battle, if you can call it that, lasted maybe an hour, probably less. Custer and every man in his immediate command died on that ridge. 210 soldiers. Not a single survivor from Custer's battalion to tell what happened from their perspective. Everything we know comes from the warriors who fought there and from the grim archaeology of the battlefield. The other 2 battalions, under Major Marcus Reno and Captain Frederick Benteen, were also attacked, but managed to reach defensive positions and hold out until relief arrived. But Custer's battalion was annihilated, wiped from existence in one afternoon. It was the greatest military victory in Lakota history, a complete and overwhelming triumph against a modern army. Sitting Bull's vision had come true. The soldiers had fallen into the camp like grasshoppers. The victory was total. The celebration that night must have been extraordinary. They had proven they could defeat the U.S. Army. They had defended their land, their people, their way of life. In that moment, everything seemed possible. It was 60 seconds of sunlight before a storm that would never end. The news of Custer's defeat reached the American public during the centennial celebrations of independence. The shock, the rage, the humiliation of a decorated Civil War officer, and over 200 soldiers killed by warriors the nation had been taught to see as inferior and doomed. The response was predictable and terrible. General Philip Sheridan, who had practiced total war against the Confederacy, would now practice it against the Lakota. Every resource, every soldier available. Hunt them down! No rest, no refuge, no mercy. The great gathering began to break apart. You can't keep thousands of people in one place indefinitely. The buffalo herds couldn't support them. Different bands needed to move to their own territories for the fall and winter. They had won the battle. They didn't understand yet that winning that particular battle meant they would lose the war. The army came like winter itself, relentless, inescapable, cold, general. Sheridan unleashed a campaign of total war, designed not to defeat the Lakota in battle, but to make survival impossible. Find the camps, destroy them, burn the lodges, scatter the horse herds, take or destroy the food supplies. Do this in winter, when the cold itself becomes a weapon, when there's no time to hunt, nowhere to hide, no way to rebuild what's been lost. Column after column moved through Lakota territory. They weren't trying to fight warriors in open battle. They were targeting villages, women, children, elders, everything. In November 1876, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie attacked a Cheyenne village on the Powder River, destroying everything. Over 600 lodges burned. The people escaped, but they lost everything they needed to survive winter. Many froze to death in the weeks that followed. The same pattern repeated across the plains. Find a village, attack at dawn, destroy everything, move to the next target. The warriors could win individual fights, but they couldn't protect everyone at once. They couldn't stop the army from burning food supplies and lodges faster than the people could replace them. This wasn't warfare as they understood it. This was systematic destruction of the ability to live. Crazy Horse kept fighting. His band moved constantly, trying to stay ahead of the columns, trying to find game in country that had been hunted out by thousands of refugees. They were starving. Children were dying from cold and hunger. Elders couldn't keep up with the constant movement. Every day, the situation became more impossible. One by one, the bands surrendered. Not because they were defeated in battle, but because they couldn't watch their people starve and freeze. By spring 1877, thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne had gone to the agencies, accepting reservation life because the alternative was death. Sitting Bull led his people north into Canada, beyond the reach of the U.S. Army. But even there, survival was uncertain. Crazy Horse held out longer than almost anyone. He kept moving, kept fighting, but the reality was inescapable. His people were suffering. They were dying. He could win every fight and still lose everything that mattered. In May 1877, he led his band to Fort Robinson in Nebraska Territory and surrendered. Around 1,000 people came with him, one of the last major groups to come in. The government promised they would have their own agency in the Powder River country. They promised Crazy Horse could live according to the old ways, could hunt as long as there was game. None of these promises would be kept. But in that moment, Crazy Horse believed surrender was the only way to save his people from complete destruction. Life at the agency was poison for someone like Crazy Horse. He was too famous, too respected by the warriors, too unwilling to adapt to the new order. The U.S. military officials saw him as a threat. The Indian agents saw him as uncontrollable. And critically, some of the Lakota leaders who had signed treaties and accepted reservation life years earlier saw him as a dangerous rival, someone whose presence undermined their own authority. These treaty men had made their own compromises, their own painful decisions about how to survive in a world where the old ways were dying. Crazy Horse's arrival reminded everyone of what resistance had looked like, what defiance meant. His very existence was a rebuke to accommodation. Rumors began to spread. Crazy Horse was planning to flee. He was planning to start another war. He wanted to kill General Crook. Most of these rumors came from mistranslations. The interpreters at the agencies were often of mixed heritage, caught between cultures, sometimes pushing their own agendas. A statement could be translated one way in front of Crazy Horse and another way to the military commanders. Misunderstanding became suspicion. Suspicion became paranoia. In early September 1877, just 4 months after his surrender, the situation reached a crisis. General Crook was planning a campaign against the Nez Perce, who were fighting their own desperate war to reach Canada. He wanted Lakota scouts. He wanted Crazy Horse to join. But something in the translation or the negotiation went wrong. Suddenly, military officers were convinced that Crazy Horse was plotting violence. Orders went out for his arrest. On September 5th, Crazy Horse was at the Spotted Tail Agency, visiting relatives. He was told to return to Fort Robinson for a meeting. He went voluntarily, though friends warned him it was a trap. When he arrived at the fort, he was surrounded by Indian police and soldiers. They tried to take him to the guardhouse, a small jail for military prisoners. Crazy Horse had never been imprisoned. The moment he realized what was happening, he resisted. Accounts differ on exactly what happened next. Some say he drew a knife. Some say he was simply trying to break free. His friend, Little Big Man, who had fought beside him at the Little Bighorn, tried to hold him back. In the struggle, Crazy Horse broke away. A soldier named William Gentles lunged forward with a bayonet and thrust it into Crazy Horse's back, the blade piercing his kidney. Crazy Horse collapsed. They carried him to the adjutant's office and laid him on the floor. His father sat with him. Touch the Clouds, a chief who had been trying to protect him, stood guard at the door. Through the night, Crazy Horse lay dying from an internal wound that no doctor at the fort could fix. He was around 36 years old. He had never been defeated in battle. He had led his people through victories that seemed impossible. And he was dying on the floor of a military office, killed while resisting imprisonment, betrayed by the very system he had surrendered to. Just before dawn on September 6th, 1877, Crazy Horse died. His father and a few close friends took his body and buried it in a location they never revealed. To this day, no one knows where Crazy Horse is buried. Even in death, he remained beyond the control of those who tried to confine him. His death marked the end of the Plains Wars. There would be other tragedies, other injustices, culminating in the horror at Wounded Knee 13 years later. But the era of Lakota military resistance effectively ended with Crazy Horse. Without him, without that symbol of defiance, the last hope of armed resistance faded. But something else remained. Something the army couldn't kill with bayonets or winter campaigns. The vision that had guided a young man on a hilltop. The idea that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds. The proof that courage and tactical brilliance could defeat superior numbers and technology, at least for a while. Crazy Horse became more than a man. He became a symbol, a reminder of what resistance looks like, what it costs, and why it matters. The Lakota people survived, not in the way they wanted, not in the world they had known, but they survived. And they carried Crazy Horse with them, not as a relic of the past, but as a living presence. A spirit that refused to be conquered, even when everything else was taken. His name became a rallying cry, a source of pride, a connection to a time when the outcome wasn't certain, when the future was still being decided on the open plains. Today, in the Black Hills that were supposed to be Lakota land forever. Work continues on a massive mountain carving of Crazy Horse, larger even than Mount Rushmore. It's been under construction since 1948 and remains unfinished. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe some things aren't meant to be finished or contained or fully understood. Maybe the point is the vision itself, the dream of something greater, the refusal to accept that injustice is inevitable. Crazy Horse was never defeated in battle. Remember that. In every fight he led against overwhelming odds and superior firepower, he found a way to win. What defeated him wasn't military might. It was the impossible mathematics of survival, the slow starvation and systematic destruction that made resistance unsustainable. And even that didn't break him. He chose surrender to save his people, and when they tried to imprison his spirit, he resisted to the end. The story of Crazy Horse is a tragedy, but it's also a testament to vision, to courage, to the power of belief in something larger than yourself. His 60 seconds of sunlight at the Little Bighorn showed what was possible. His death showed the price of resistance. His legacy shows that some spirits can never be conquered. No matter what armies march against them, no matter how much time passes, no matter how completely the world they fought for has disappeared, the vision endures. And that, ultimately, is what matters most.